The phone rang at 2:07 in the morning. Imani was already half awake. She had been for the last hour, lying in the dark in the apartment Jun-Seo had arranged for her on the 14th floor, listening to Seoul breathe through the glass. It was a different sound than Chicago. Chicago breathed in sirens and bass from cars and the distant percussion of the city never fully settling. Seoul breathed in a lower register. More even. More controlled. She was still learning it. She grabbed the phone before the second ring and looked at the screen. Aunt Deborah. Chicago. 1:07 p.m. their time. She answered. Her Aunt Deborah was not a woman who called in the middle of the workday without a reason. She was a retired school administrator from Woodlawn who organized her days with the precision of a military schedule and considered calling during business hours an imposition. The fact that she was calling at all made Imani's chest tighten before the call connected. "Baby," Deborah said. And the way she said it, soft, apologetic, carrying something, confirmed the tightening. Imani sat up. "What happened?" "Your mama is okay," Deborah said immediately. "I need you to hear that first. She is okay." "Deborah. She's been in the hospital since Tuesday." A breath. Her heart was doing something irregular. They called it an arrhythmia. They're monitoring her. "She didn't want me to call you." It was Thursday. Imani had spoken to her mother on Monday evening. Her mother had laughed at a story about a vendor mix-up, and said she was fine and asked if Seoul had good sweet potatoes and said good night in the exact same voice she always used. The voice of a woman who was, as far as Imani had known, perfectly well. "She's been there since Tuesday," Imani said. "She didn't want to worry you, baby. You know how she is." Yes. She knew how her mother was. She knew exactly how Claudette Brooks was, 61 years old, Southside Chicago born and raised, had cleaned 8 houses a week for 22 years to put Imani through school, had never once in her life accepted being worried about or worried over, had called herself fine through a broken wrist, a flooded basement, and the funeral of Imani's father, and had made dinner for 12 people the next day because keeping moving was the only philosophy she had ever subscribed to. "What hospital?" Imani said. Deborah told her. Imani was already out of bed and moving toward her suitcase before the call ended. She made it to the hallway before she had to stop. She wasn't sure why she stopped in the hallway. Her body made the decision before her mind caught up, pressed her back against the corridor wall and slid down it until she was sitting on the floor, legs in front of her, phone still in her hand, in her sleep shorts and an old Chicago hoodie that had survived 6 international trips in 3 climate zones. Seoul was very quiet at 2:07 in the morning. She sat there for a while, not crying, not panicking, just sitting with the knowledge that her mother had been in a hospital for 2 days and had not called her, which was either the most loving thing or the most maddening thing Claudette Brooks had ever done, and was probably both. She heard footsteps at the far end of the corridor. She didn't look up. The footsteps were unhurried. The walk of someone not going anywhere quickly, returning from somewhere late. She recognized the cadence before she identified why she recognized it. The footsteps stopped. She looked up. Kang Jun-Seo was standing 10 feet away in the corridor, still in his dress shirt, white, open at the collar, sleeves rolled to his elbows, which meant he had been in his office suite until past 2 in the morning, which was not surprising. He was looking at her on the floor with the expression that was not quite any one thing. Not alarm. Not pity. Something more considered than either. He walked to her. He sat down on the floor next to her, back against the wall, long legs stretched across the hallway carpet. Just sat. Did not ask. Did not offer. Just occupied the same small patch of floor in the corridor at 2:07 in the morning and was quiet. They stayed like that for a while. Then Imani said, "My mother is sick." Jun-Seo looked at her. "She's been in the hospital since Tuesday," Imani said. "She didn't tell me." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "How serious?" I don't know yet. My aunt says it's her heart. They're monitoring. He nodded once. Not dismissively. The nod of someone storing a fact accurately. I need to go home, she said. I know, he said. She looked at him. He was looking forward at the opposite wall, jaw set with the focused stillness she had come to recognize as the way he held things when they were serious. When do we leave? He said. She stopped. The question sat in the air between them, in the 2 a.m. quiet of the corridor. What? She said. He looked at her then. Dark eyes completely open, the way they got at night when the professional surface wore thin. When do we leave? He said again. Not a question this time. Imani looked at Kang Jun-Seo sitting on the floor of a hotel corridor in his $2,000 trousers and his rolled-up sleeves and his unhurried intention, and she thought, this man has been planning this moment longer than he's admitted to anyone. She didn't say that. Instead she said quietly, You have the quarterly review Friday. I know, he said. Jun-Seo. Imani, he said with the exact patient, direct, non-negotiable energy of a man who had made a decision and was now simply communicating it. When do we leave? Seoul was quiet outside the windows. She looked at the floor. She looked at her hands. She thought about her mother in a hospital bed who had not called her, and about the specific love behind that silence, the love that says I will not be your burden, I will not pull you from your life, I will handle this myself the way I have handled everything, and she thought about how that same love had made her feel, her whole life both protected and terribly alone. She looked at Jun-Seo. Tomorrow evening, she said. The first flight we can get. He nodded. He took out his phone and typed one message. His assistant would handle the rest before either of them woke up. They sat in the corridor a little longer, saying nothing, in the way of two people who have passed a threshold without naming it. Eventually she said, You should sleep. So should you, he said. Neither of them moved immediately. When they finally stood, he walked her to her door. He didn't touch her. He said goodnight in a voice that was quiet enough to be a different kind of thing. And then he walked back down the corridor toward his own suite. Imani stood at her door and watched him go. Then she went inside and started packing. Welcome back, family. This is part 2 and it is already different. If you are already feeling this story in places you didn't plan to feel it, hit that subscribe button right now and ring that bell so Soul Shadows never misses you again. Drop I felt that corridor scene in the comments because that right there? That was the moment. That was when it stopped being about a job. Let's keep going. 3 months is a specific amount of time. Long enough to form habits. Long enough to have inside jokes and preferred corners of preferred cafes. Long enough to know how someone takes their coffee without asking, and to notice when they have switched from an Americano to green tea because they are stressed, and to know that the switch to green tea means give her space for 20 minutes and then ask what needs fixing. Not quite long enough to know what to call any of it. Imani and Jun-Seo had spent 3 months in the space between something and something else, and neither of them had moved to close the gap. Not because neither of them wanted to. Because wanting something and naming it were two different risks, and they were both people who had learned to be careful about risk. What the 3 months had looked like in practice. 7 corporate events, 3 charity functions, and 1 product launch that had been a logistical nightmare until Imani restructured the entire vendor flow at 11 in the morning and delivered it perfectly by 6 in the evening. Jun-Seo had watched the restructuring happen from across the room and later told his CFO, with the same brevity he brought to everything, that he wanted her on retainer for the next 12 months. The CFO had looked up from his laptop. Permanently. 12 months, Jun-Seo had said. Which, his CFO understood for Jun-Seo meant the same thing. What the 3 months had looked like personally. Coffee delivered to her office every morning at 8:15 from the specific cafe 3 streets over that she had mentioned once. Just once in passing 7 weeks ago, as having the best Americano she had found in the district. She had mentioned it in a sentence about delivery logistics and nothing more. The coffee had appeared the next morning anyway, and every morning since, without comment, without acknowledgement, without either of them ever naming what was happening. It was the kind of kindness that exists only in the gap between what people do and what they say, and Imani had recognized it immediately for what it was and had chosen very deliberately to let it be what it was without making it a thing. There were dinners that started as working dinners and ran 3 hours past any professional justification. She ate the way she did everything, with complete attention and no performance, trying each banchan dish without asking what it was first, making decisions quickly and never revisiting them. He watched her eat the way he watched her work, with a particular quality of attention he reserved for things he found genuinely extraordinary, which was not the quality of attention he gave most things, which she had begun to notice and deliberately not comment on. There were walks along the Han River on 3 Saturday afternoons. None of these were arranged. The first had begun because they happened to both be leaving the hotel at the same time, and the river was the direction she was already walking, and he fell into step beside her without asking. They had walked for 2.5 hours. On the second Saturday it happened again. Same direction, same unhurried companionship. By the third Saturday it was simply a thing that happened on Saturdays, and neither of them had named it a plan, and both of them had arranged their Saturday mornings around it. Conversations that were not the conversations of an employer and a vendor. Conversations that were the kind you only have with someone you have decided, consciously or otherwise, to let past the outer layer. Imani had told him, one evening on the river, about her father. How he died when she was 19, a coronary at 52, working a double shift at the plant. How she'd learned that morning and driven herself to campus and sat in her 10 a.m. class because she hadn't known what else to do. Because her mother always said you keep moving, you keep building, you don't stop. Jun-Seo had listened. He hadn't offered anything immediately. Then, after a long pause, my father died when I was 26. My brother and I drove to the hospital separately. We didn't talk in the car. We didn't talk in the waiting room. We talked after. For 3 hours in a parking garage, just the two of us. It was the last real conversation we had before he got sick too. She had looked at him. He died before your brother? 18 months before. He looked at the river. I was 30 when they were both gone. She had understood then something about Jun-Seo that hadn't fully resolved in 3 months of proximity. He hadn't only been shaped by grief. He had been shaped by the specific geometry of grief layered over grief, the kind that comes so quickly it doesn't give you time to finish one before the next one arrives. And he had built KangTech's empire and raised Min-Jun and kept everything running, not because he was cold, but because stopping was not something he had ever allowed himself to figure out how to do. Min-Jun, for his part, had observed 3 months of this with the focused attention of a scientist whose most ambitious hypothesis was proving out. Not quickly, not all at once, but with the slow accumulation of evidence that is far more satisfying than a dramatic single confirmation. He had a section in his notebook now labeled Progress. It had 14 entries. Entry 1. Uncle laughed at something she said at dinner. Not polite. Real, the kind that happens before a person decides whether to let it. Check the date. First real one I have heard since last December. Entry 4. She brought me a book from a used bookstore in Insadong. She set it on the cafe table and said she thought I would find it useful, and did not make a production of it. It was a collection of logical reasoning puzzles. She had already solved 3 of them in pencil, and left her marks in the margins. I kept those marks. That is how I know she was thinking of me when she found it. Entry 7. He rerouted his entire afternoon schedule to walk through the event space when she was there. He described it to his assistant as a site review. It was not a site review. Everything in that space was already perfect. She had handled it. He knew it was handled. He just wanted to be in the room where she was. I do not believe he is aware he does this. Entry 11. I observed them in the service corridor behind the hotel restaurant at 9:40 in the evening after the product launch. He was helping her carry equipment cases to the loading bay. Jun-Seo Kang does not carry equipment. He has an operations team. He has a facilities coordinator. He was carrying the cases. She was letting him. Neither of them spoke about it. I wrote it down. Entry 14, dated 2 days before Imani's aunt called from Chicago. He came back from a business trip to Tokyo. He brought her flowers. Not for a gala. Not for an event. He brought them and set them on the table in the coordination office and gave no explanation. She looked at them for a long time. I was in the corridor, the door was open, she did not see me. And her face did something private and real that she would not have allowed if she had known she was observed. He pretended he had not noticed. She pretended the flowers were an unremarkable thing. They are, I have concluded, both extraordinarily poor at this particular part. The rest they are managing well. This part requires intervention. Min-Jun closed the notebook and capped his pen. Progress, he noted internally. Significant. But the last distance was the hardest one, and they were both stalled at it. He had been patient for 3 months. He was 9 years old and his patience was architectural, deep structural, built for long projects. But it was not infinite. He had a letter he needed to send. He had been waiting for the right occasion, the right wait, the moment when it would land where it needed to land and do what it needed to do. He did not know, sitting in the hotel garden on that Thursday afternoon, that the occasion was already coming. He did not know that before morning something would shift, something large and human and completely outside his plan, and that it would become quietly exactly what he needed. He would find out, as he always found out. He always found out. Kang Soo-yeon arrived in Seoul on a Wednesday with 2 pieces of luggage, a personal assistant, and the air of a woman who had not been surprised by anything in 30 years. She was 64 years old. She had the bone structure of a woman who had once been spectacularly beautiful and had transitioned, through the work of time and discipline, into a different and arguably more impressive kind of striking. Her hair was silver, fully deliberately silver, cut to a precise bob, and her posture had the carriage of someone who had decided decades ago exactly how they would carry themselves and had not deviated. She had built the foundation of KangTech before Jun-Seo took it over. She had raised 2 sons after her husband's death and watched one of them grieve and build and grieve again. She had moved to Busan 6 years ago for the quiet, and she visited Seoul 4 times a year, and those visits were always known about in advance and scheduled around. This visit was not scheduled. She called Jun-Seo from the lobby. He came downstairs, looked at his mother, looked at her luggage, said, "How long?" "A week," she said. "Maybe 2. He looked at her for a moment longer. Then he said, "I'll have them prepare your suite." And that was the conversation they had in the lobby. She found out about Imani in stages, the way she found out about most things she had not been told directly, by observing. She saw the event planning materials in the hotel conference room. She saw the way the hotel staff referred to someone named Ms. Brooks with a particular warm deference that was different from professional courtesy. She heard Jun-Seo on a phone call say her name 3 times in 5 minutes in the context of an event problem, and the 3rd time say it with a patience he did not typically apply to professional problems. On the 3rd day she asked her grandson. She found Min-Jun in the hotel garden with his book and sat down next to him and said, "Tell me about the American woman." Min-Jun looked up, considered, then said, "She fixed his flower arrangement." His grandmother looked at him for a moment. "That's all you're going to say?" "She fixed the flower arrangement," he repeated. He came to the ballroom for a site visit. She had already fixed it. She didn't wait for him to notice it was wrong. She didn't tell him she'd fixed it. She just fixed it. He went back to his book. That's the part that matters. Kang Soo-yeon sat in the hotel garden and thought about that for a long time. She met Imani that afternoon, in the corridor outside the event prep room. The meeting was what a meeting looks like when two very composed women with very good instincts encounter each other without preparation. They were both gracious. They were both completely alert. "Ms. Brooks," Soo-yeon said, "I've heard good things about your events." "Thank you," Imani said. "It's a beautiful property to work with. Jun-Seo told me you're from Chicago." "I am. And you've been in Seoul 3 months. Going on 4. Soo-yeon looked at her with the careful, unhurried attention of a woman who had assessed a great many people over a great many decades and had almost always been right about them. Imani looked back with the direct, uncowed gaze of a woman who was not going to shrink for anyone's assessment, including this one. The silence was brief but full. Then Soo-yeon said, "The ivory flowers at the November gala were better than white would have been. Jun-Seo told me about the reasoning. It was correct." "Thank you," Imani said. "I thought so." Soo-yeon almost smiled. "Good afternoon, Ms. Brooks." She walked away. Imani watched her go and thought, "I like her. And I am afraid of her." Both things are completely true. That evening, Soo-yeon sat with Jun-Seo after dinner while Min-Jun was in his room. She had waited until the apartment settled into its evening quiet before she folded her hands on the table and looked at her eldest son across it. "The American woman," she said. Jun-Seo looked up from the document he had opened but not been reading for the past 20 minutes. "What about her? She doesn't behave around you the way women usually do." He set the document aside. "No. She told me today that she has been navigating the world as it is for 33 years, and does not need it dressed up." His mother looked at him carefully. "She said it to my face. Without adjustment. Without calculating whether I would find it impertinent." "That's accurate to her," he said. "How long have you known she was different?" Jun-Seo looked at his mother. "Since the first 5 minutes." She studied him. 5 minutes. "She was standing in the hotel lobby in front of my display panels," he said. "She looked at all of it. Every screen, every cover. Then she told her assistant I wasn't that handsome." Soo-yeon went very still. "She said that. Out loud. In the lobby. And Min-Jun was nearby. Arms crossed by the time she finished the sentence." His mother looked at the table. Her lips did not quite do what they might have done if she had let them. "I see. He wrote her a letter," Jun-Seo said. "While we were in Chicago. He sent it by international courier. 3 pages in English because, as he told me afterward, he wanted no translation between what he meant and what she received." Soo-yeon was quiet for a moment. "What did it say?" "He told me not to ask." A pause. "He left me a note instead. On the kitchen table. Said I wrote Imani a letter. Don't ask what it said. Figure out your own words." He paused, with a period at the end of the last sentence. Kang Soo-yeon sat at the table in her son's apartment in the evening quiet and thought about the child she had watched grieve for 4 years. The boy who went very quiet and very careful after November, who kept his sadness in his notebook and his posture and his precise, organized attention to everything, and she felt something in her chest loosen that had been held there for a long time. "He sent her a letter," she said softly. "On his own." "Yes. Not because you asked him." "I didn't know." She nodded slowly. Then, "I was prepared to be against this." "I know," Jun-Seo said. "I want you to understand that word. Prepared. I had organized my position. The distance is real. The cultural pressures are real. The way certain people in this industry and this country will frame this relationship is real. I was not going to pretend otherwise. They don't stop being real because I have feelings about her," he said. I know all of it. And he looked at his mother, this woman who had outlasted grief twice over, who had silver hair because she had decided on it and a posture that was a daily statement and the specific warmth of someone who had never stopped working and never stopped loving, and had kept both things running simultaneously for 6 decades. He said. And Min-Jun smiles at her without planning to. His real smile. The one that looks like Yoonho's. The apartment was completely quiet. His mother's expression moved, deep involuntary. The thing she never fully hid when someone said her younger son's name with love. She closed her eyes for 1 second. Opened them. I know, she said. Very quietly. I've been counting. 3 times yesterday. He doesn't know I was counting. She picked up her tea. Held it. Set it down. Then you will have to decide, she said, how much hard you're willing to carry. I've been carrying hard my entire life, he said. I know that. She looked at him steadily. That is not what I am asking. I am asking whether you are willing to stop carrying it alone. Whether you are ready to be seen rather than managed. By someone who will not perform around you, and will not let you perform around her either. She paused. That is a different kind of hard. It requires something you have not practiced in a very long time. He was quiet. Go figure out your own words, she said. Before that child writes another letter telling you to. He almost smiled. She saw it. She looked away before either of them had to do anything about it. Good night, Jun-Seo, she said quietly. He said, Good night, Amma. The room was quiet. Jun-Seo did not answer. Not because he didn't have one, but because the answer was something he needed to give in the right direction, and his mother was not the one who needed to hear it. Jun-Seo called his CFO at 6 in the morning. His CFO, Park Sung-jin, was a man who had worked for KangTech for 11 years and believed himself to have seen everything his employer was capable of doing. He answered on the second ring because an employer who called at 6 in the morning merited a second ring answer. The Friday strategic review, Jun-Seo said. Cancel it. Park Sung-jin's hand tightened on the phone. The annual strategy review. Yes. The one scheduled with 42 senior directors. Yes. The one that has been calendared for 8 months. I understand which one, Jun-Seo said, with the patience of someone who has already made the decision and does not need the decision interrogated. Park Sung-jin had attended 6 annual strategy reviews. Jun-Seo had been present for all 6. Jun-Seo had been present for every annual strategy review in KangTech's history under his leadership. He had attended one remotely from a hospital waiting room while Min-Jun was getting a broken wrist set, and had managed to chair the entire meeting via video link without anyone on the board understanding he was not in the building. Reschedule it to the following week, Jun-Seo said. I'll be out of the country. Out. Park Sung-jin stopped. Began again. Chicago, he said slowly, because he was an exceptionally good CFO and exceptionally good CFOs paid attention to patterns. Yes, Jun-Seo said. I'll handle the rescheduling, Park said. The call ended. Park Sung-jin sat in his home office at 6 in the morning and looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then he picked up his phone and called Jun-Seo's personal assistant, who was already awake, and told her what had happened. She was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. Then, he's going to Chicago. Yes. He canceled the annual strategy review to go to Chicago. Yes, she said. Oh my God. Which was, Park Sung-jin thought, probably the appropriate response. Min-Jun found out at breakfast. He was eating rice and not reading his book for once, because he was watching his uncle, who was standing at the window of the hotel restaurant with his phone, making arrangements with a focused efficiency that Min-Jun could read from across the room as being different from his usual focused efficiency. This had the quality of something personal underneath the professional surface. When Jun-Seo sat down, Min-Jun said, "You canceled the board meeting." Jun-Seo looked at him. "How do you know that?" "Your CFO texted your assistant in the lobby." "I was sitting near the lobby." "You shouldn't read other people's texts." "I didn't read it. I inferred from her expression." Min-Jun poured himself more orange juice. "You canceled it to go to Chicago." Jun-Seo regarded his nephew. "Yes." Min-Jun was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded once, with the decisive energy of someone confirming a correct answer. "Good," he said, and went back to his breakfast. Jun-Seo looked at this child, this 9-year-old who had no business knowing what he knew and noticing what he noticed and filing what he filed, and felt something he rarely felt, which was the specific combination of deep gratitude and mild exasperation that Min-Jun reliably produced in him. "You're staying here," Jun-Seo said. "With your grandmother." Min-Jun looked up sharply. "I want to go." "I know. I've never been to Chicago." "I know. Imani would want me there." "Imani's mother is in the hospital," Jun-Seo said, with the careful firmness of someone delivering information that is also a boundary. "It's not a trip, Min-Jun. It's not something you come to as a visitor. Imani needs to be there for her mother without managing anyone else. Do you understand?" Min-Jun was quiet. He looked at his juice. Then, "Yes," he said. "I understand." He was quiet through the rest of breakfast. Later that morning, before the car came to take Jun-Seo and Imani to the airport, Min-Jun went to his room. He sat at the desk. He took out his notebook, not the observation notebook, a different one, with plain pages and a dark green cover that he kept in the bottom drawer. He uncapped his pen. He thought for a long time. Then he began to write. The south side of Chicago in November was a different kind of beautiful than Seoul. It didn't try to be spectacular. It was practical and warm and organized around what mattered. The corner stores open past midnight, the churches that doubled as community centers, the houses with 3 locks on the doors and flowers in the window boxes. The kind of neighborhood that had been through everything and was still here, still fed, still moving. The kind of neighborhood where people had names for each other. Imani had grown up on a street where Mrs. Patterson 3 doors down had a key to their apartment and her mother had a key to Mrs. Patterson's, and neither family had ever needed to ask why. Jun-Seo stood outside Claudette Brooks' apartment building and looked at the brick and the fire escapes and the sound of a television through a second-floor window, and the smell of something cooking that reached all the way to the sidewalk, and Imani, standing beside him with her overnight bag, said, "You okay?" "Yes," he said. He looked at the building. "Is this where you grew up?" "Couple streets over." "Same neighborhood." She looked at the building too. "Mom moved here after Dad died." "Smaller. Easier to manage." He nodded. He picked up her bag before she could and carried it up the stairs. Claudette Brooks was not in a hospital bed. She was, against her discharge doctor's specific preference, sitting in her kitchen armchair with a blanket over her lap and a cup of tea and an expression of profound satisfaction at being in her own kitchen. She was 61 years old, dark brown-skinned, with Imani's high cheekbones and rounder eyes, and the specific imperious warmth of a woman who had run a household and a community and a daughter entirely on her own terms for 20 years. She looked at Imani when they came through the door with an expression of love and mild defiance. "Before you say anything," Claudette said, "I am fine." "Mama," Imani said, "I am fine, the doctors are satisfied, I am home and I made soup." She looked past Imani. She looked at Jun-Seo, who was standing in the doorway with her daughter's overnight bag and the composed, careful expression of a man who was in an environment entirely outside his experience and was doing an excellent job of not showing it. Claudette studied him with the quiet, absolute attention of a woman who has assessed 1,000 people and missed maybe 3. "Set the bag down," she said to him. "Sit." Jun-Seo set the bag down. He sat at the kitchen table. Claudette looked at Imani. Get him some soup. Imani stood in her mother's kitchen, the kitchen she had grown up in, the kitchen that smelled like every Sunday, the kitchen where her mother had told her on a Tuesday evening to keep moving, keep building, don't stop, and something in her chest loosened by about 1 inch and she went to get the soup. Jun-Seo ate his mother's soup in the kitchen of a South Side apartment with a blanket over the chair arm and gospel music barely audible from somewhere in the building and the particular warmth of a room that had been lived in and loved for a long time. He ate like someone who had forgotten that food could be this kind of thing. Claudette watched him eat. Then she said, "You run the company." "Yes," he said. "The big one? The tech one?" "Yes. My sister sent me the articles," Claudette said, with the matter-of-fact tone of a woman establishing context. She was very excited. I told her the important question isn't what you run. The important question is what kind of man you are. Jun-Seo looked at her steadily. That seems like the right question. Claudette's eyes narrowed fractionally in the way of a woman encountering a correct answer, and not wanting to give away her approval too quickly. And what kind of man are you? He thought about it. He didn't answer immediately, which Imani across the kitchen clocked as the right instinct. Her mother could smell a prepackaged answer from 30 feet. "I work too much," he said finally. "I've been told I'm difficult to know. I raised my nephew after my brother died, and I did the best I could with that. And he's a better person than I was at his age, which I believe says more about him than about me." A pause. "And he stopped. Looked at the soup. "I'm trying to be less afraid of things than I have been." Claudette was quiet for a moment. She looked at Imani. Imani was looking at Jun-Seo with an expression that she probably did not know her face was making. Claudette looked back at Jun-Seo. She said, "Do you make her laugh?" Jun-Seo was still for a moment. Then with a directness that was also the most honest kind of humility, "I'm working on it." Claudette looked at him for a long beat. Then, "At least you know you need to." She picked up her tea. "Have more soup." He had more soup. Later, when Claudette dozed in her armchair and Imani was washing the bowls at the sink, Jun-Seo stood at the kitchen window and looked out at the street below, the brick buildings and the fire escapes and the evening settling over the south side. And he was so quiet and so still that Imani didn't hear him breathe for a moment. He was looking at the street, at the corner store with the hand-painted sign, at the kids on the steps 3 buildings down who had been out there since they arrived, arguing about something with the full-voiced investment of people who had nowhere more important to be. At the woman across the street who was sweeping her front steps at 7 in the evening because sweeping your front steps at 7 in the evening was a thing she did, and the street was better for it. Jun-Seo. He turned. "She likes you," Imani said. For the record, the soup was her way of saying that. He looked at her. "I could tell. She doesn't give soup to people she doesn't like." "What does she give people she doesn't like?" "Nothing," Imani said. "She just doesn't make food for them. She's very clear that way." Something moved through his expression. "Your mother is exceptional," he said. "I know," she said quietly. He turned back to the window. After a moment, "I walked around the neighborhood this afternoon, while you were at the hospital with your aunt." She looked at him. "You walked around?" "I had 3 hours." He looked at the street. "I wanted to see where you were from. Not a summary of it. The actual streets." She didn't say anything. "The church on the corner has been there since 1923, he said. "There's a date above the door. The bakery 2 blocks over. The owner told me the bread recipe is from his grandmother. He said it the way people say things they are proud of without knowing they're proud of them." He paused. "A woman on the next block asked if I was lost. I said I was from Seoul." She said, "Korea? My nephew just got back from Seoul." And then she told me about her nephew for 12 minutes. Something moved at the corner of his expression. I liked the neighborhood. You walked around the south side of Chicago for 3 hours and talked to strangers. The strangers talked to me, he said. I mostly listened. She looked at him standing at her mother's kitchen window, this Korean billionaire CEO in his perfect suit in a South Side apartment, watching kids argue on a stoop with the full genuine attention of someone who had needed to see this, who had needed to know where she had been built, and she thought, I am in so much trouble. She turned back to the sink. Your mother is exceptional, he said again quietly. I know, she said. I got that from her. He looked at her back for a moment. Then he turned back to the window and they were quiet together in Claudette's kitchen while the South Side evening settled outside and the gospel music from somewhere in the building was low and certain and unhurried, the way it always was. Jun-Seo visited Claudette at the hospital that morning. He went alone. Imani was at the pharmacy picking up the new prescription, and when she came back to the room, her mother and Jun-Seo were already 40 minutes into a conversation that had clearly moved well past pleasantries. Claudette was telling him about Imani's father. Imani stood in the doorway for a moment without either of them noticing. He was a quiet man, Claudette was saying. Not cold. Quiet. There is a difference. Some people are quiet because they have nothing to say. Robert was quiet because he was always thinking more than he was speaking, and the thinking mattered to him. He would rather say one true thing than 10 comfortable ones. She looked at Jun-Seo. My daughter got that from him. Jun-Seo was sitting in the visitor's chair with his forearms on his knees, leaning forward slightly, the posture of someone who was genuinely listening, not performing attention. She doesn't say 10 things when one will do, he said. No, Claudette said. She never has. Used to frustrate her teachers. A pause. Still frustrates people who aren't paying attention. I pay attention, Jun-Seo said. Claudette looked at him for a moment. I know you do, she said. I wouldn't have talked to you this long if you didn't. In the doorway, Imani pressed her lips together and said nothing. Jun-Seo said. She told me he worked a double shift the day he died. He did, Claudette said. The words were plain. She had said them enough times that the saying of them had a shape she knew. He called me at 6 in the morning before the second shift started. He said. I remember the exact words. I will always remember them, he said. Claudette, I am so tired. And I said, Robert, come home then. And he said, I will. After this one. The room was very quiet. He didn't come home, Jun-Seo said. Not a question. Just the acknowledgement of someone who understood how those sentences ended. He didn't come home, Claudette said. But he called. That is the thing I hold on to. He called because he wanted to hear my voice. Even when he was that tired, he still wanted to hear my voice. Jun-Seo was quiet. He looked at his hands. Then he said very carefully, I understand that. More than I used to. Claudette looked at him. Her eyes were sharp and warm at the same time. The combination that Imani had spent 33 years trying to replicate and hadn't quite managed. Is that right? She said. Someone recently showed me, he said, that there are voices you choose to hear even when it would be easier not to. A pause. Your daughter's is one of them. Claudette held his gaze for a long moment. Long enough to be thorough. Long enough to be sure. Then she said, good. Just that. One word. The way she always delivered verdicts. Imani chose that moment to step fully into the room and rattle the pharmacy bag. I got the prescription, she said, with the voice of someone who had absolutely not been standing in the doorway. Claudette looked at her. How long were you in that doorway? I just got here. Her mother took the pharmacy bag with the expression of someone who had already decided what they believed. Sit down, baby. We were talking. Imani sat. Jun-Seo glanced at her from across the room. She looked back at him. He looked slightly, very slightly, almost imperceptibly caught. Which was the first time she had ever seen Kang Jun-Seo look caught at anything. She would think about that later. She would think about it more than once. The courier arrived the next morning. Imani was at the hospital for Claudette's morning check-in. The doctors wanted 2 more days of monitoring, nothing alarming, just thorough. When the front desk nurse appeared in the room doorway and said there was a package for Ms. Brooks, Imani thought it was the flowers she'd had Priya send from Seoul. It was not flowers. It was a small envelope, cream-colored, the size of a birthday card. Hand-addressed in precise, careful handwriting she recognized immediately. The letters were slightly too neat. The lines were perfectly even on an unlined surface. It was addressed, Imani Brooks, Chicago, from K. to Min-Jun, Seoul. She told her mother she'd be back in a few minutes. She went to the family bathroom down the corridor. She locked the door. She sat on the closed lid of the toilet and opened the envelope. 3 pages, folded in thirds. Both sides of the paper covered in that same careful, precise, slightly too neat handwriting. The letter began, "I am writing this because I think you should know some things. Not because Uncle asked me to. He doesn't know I'm writing this. This is from me. I decided to write it in English so there was no translation between what I mean and what you receive." Imani pressed her lips together and kept reading. "I am going to tell you about November. Not because you need to know it, but because I think you already feel some of it. I have watched you feel it without knowing what you were feeling, and I think it is better to say things plainly than to let people carry them alone. My parents died on a Tuesday afternoon in November. I was 5 years old and I was with my grandmother. I remember the phone call. Not the words, I didn't hear the words, but the shape of the silence that followed them. Silence has a shape. I know this now. The silence after that call was the shape of something closing. My uncle arrived from Tokyo 4 hours and 17 minutes later. I know the exact time because I had been watching the clock since the silence. He came in and set down his travel bag and he crouched down in front of me and put his hands on my shoulders and said, "You are going to come live with me. I am going to take care of you. That is what is happening now." He did not ask if I was okay. He did not tell me it would be okay. He did not offer things that were not true. He told me what was and what would be, and he said it like it was already decided, like he had decided it on the plane, like it had not been a question for him for even 1 minute. Then he stood up and walked to the kitchen. And I heard him once, one sound, one moment, and then he was quiet again. He has not made that sound since. Not once in 4 years. Not in front of me. I want you to understand what he has done in 4 years. He has run a company that employs 40,000 people. He has attended every school event I have had, including a science fair where the first place project was a baking soda volcano, and I am confident he found this painful. He reads my school reports the night they are sent. He learned to braid hair because my teacher said it was important for children to have routines, and he did not outsource this. He watched video tutorials and practiced on the housekeeper's wig until he was competent, and he has done my hair every morning for 4 years. He has not, in 4 years, built anything for himself. I know you are deciding something. I have been watching you decide it for 3 months. You are very careful and you have been hurt before, and the careful comes from the hurt, and I understand that. I understand it more than a 9-year-old should probably need to. But I want you to know from me, not from anyone else. You already belong to us. You have already been chosen. You fixed the flower that was crooked when no one asked you to. You helped me fix the seating chart and then let me think it was a collaboration rather than you being kind. You stayed in Seoul when your plan was to leave. You trusted me at the charity gala when I gave you almost no reason to. You asked my uncle about my parents once quietly in the hallway outside the hotel restaurant, and I was around the corner and I heard his voice change when he answered you. It went softer and steadier at the same time, the way something does when it is finally being handled carefully after a long time of not being handled at all. That is what family does. pays attention. It stays. Trusts when it doesn't have to. I am 9 years old. Almost 10. I know that adults make their own decisions and I cannot make this one for either of you. I am not trying to. I am only telling you what I see because I think someone should tell you, because I think you have spent a long time without enough people saying true things to you directly. Also, the butter and the rice is correct. It has always been correct. Don't tell Uncle I said this. He is still deliberating. He will arrive at the truth on his own. He always does. He is just slow. Kang Min-Jun. P.S. I looked up Chicago before you left. I found something I thought you would want to know. The Chicago River runs backward. They reversed its direction in 1900, through a feat of engineering that took years and was considered impossible until it wasn't. They changed the direction of a whole river because the original direction wasn't working. They decided the river was going the wrong way, and they made it go the right way instead. I think about this sometimes. I think some things that look permanent are only the direction they happen to start in. I think you can decide to change the direction. I think you already have. Imani sat in a hospital bathroom in Chicago and read the letter twice. Then she read the postscript a third time. She put the letter down on her knee. She pressed the back of her hand against her mouth. She sat in the fluorescent quiet of the hospital bathroom for approximately 4 minutes and let the whole weight of it land. The letter, the river, the 4 years, the 3 pages of careful handwriting from a child who had lost everything and was still paying attention, still building, still choosing to let people in even when the math of his life said he had every reason not to. Then she stood up. She ran the cold water. She pressed her cupped hands against her face and held it there for a moment, the cold water and the quiet and the particular smell of hospitals that never changes anywhere in the world. She looked at herself in the mirror, her honey-brown skin and her natural hair and her red eyes and the smile she could not stop, had completely given up trying to stop, the full real smile of someone who has just received something true and is still absorbing it. That child, she said very quietly to her own reflection. She dried her face. She folded the letter carefully back into thirds, very carefully, the way you fold something you are going to read again and keep. She put it in the inside pocket of her jacket, against her chest. She unlocked the door and went back to her mother's room. Claudette looked at her from the hospital bed with the immediate, complete assessment of a mother who has been reading her daughter's face for 33 years, and has never once misread it. What happened? She said. Nothing. I'm fine. Your eyes are red. I was washing my face. With what grief? Imani sat down in the chair beside the bed. She looked at her mother, 61 years old, hospital gown over her own nightgown because she had brought her own from home, monitors attached, the slight bruise at her wrist from the 4, still looking at Imani with the same eyes she'd always had, the ones that missed nothing and forgave almost everything. It was from Min-Jun, Imani said. The boy. The nephew. Yes. Claudette was quiet for a moment. What did he say? Imani thought about how to answer. Then she took the letter out of her jacket pocket and handed it to her mother. Claudette took it. She unfolded it. She read slowly. Her reading glasses were in her purse on the chair. She reached for them without looking away from the page, found them, put them on. She read all 3 pages. She read the postscript. She folded it back the same careful way Imani had. She handed it back. She was quiet for a long moment. He reversed the Chicago River, Claudette said. He did. In a postscript. Yes. Claudette looked at the ceiling. Then. Smart children are a particular kind of gift. And a particular kind of responsibility. You understand that? I think so. They see everything, Claudette said. Every real thing. You cannot perform around them. You cannot give them a managed version of yourself and expect them not to notice. This child. She paused, tapping the letter in Imani's hand. This child has already decided. He decided before his uncle did. He's waiting for you to catch up. Imani looked at her mother. Baby, Claudette said. What are you waiting for? And Imani, who was 33 years old and had been independent and sharp and capable, and exactly right about most things and had spent the last 3 months carrying a packed bag in her head just in case, said, I don't know. I think I needed someone to say it without wanting something from me when they said it. Claudette looked at her for a long time. Then she said, well, now someone has. She reached over and patted Imani's hand with the calm, certain unhurried warmth of a woman who had always known how this was going to go, and had simply been waiting for the rest of them to figure it out. Bring him to Chicago sometime, Claudette said. The uncle too. But I want to see this boy. Mama. I want to give him soup, Claudette said firmly. That child deserves soup. A 9-year-old wrote a letter and referenced the reversal of the Chicago River. If you are not completely undone right now, I need you to check on yourself. This is the moment. This is what everyone came back for. Hit that like button right now, it's the least you can do for Min-Jun. And drop he reversed the river in the comments so we know who read every word. Subscribe if you aren't already on the Soul Shadows family. Don't move. We are not done. They flew back to Seoul 2 days later, when Claudette's doctors confirmed she was stable and sent her home with a medication adjustment and strict instructions that she treated as strong suggestions she would evaluate on a case-by-case basis. Jun-Seo's private plane was quieter than commercial. Imani had never been on a private plane before this trip and had declined to comment on this fact either direction, which Jun-Seo had observed and also declined to comment on. The seats were wide and the lighting was soft, and somewhere over the Pacific, after the meal service and after Jun-Seo's laptop finally closed, the quiet between them had the particular texture of a quiet that was about to become something. He said, What did Min-Jun write to you? She turned to look at him. He left me a note, Jun-Seo said. Before we left Seoul. I found it on the kitchen table. Said I wrote Imani a letter. Don't ask what it said. Figure out your own words. There was a period at the end of the last sentence. Imani absorbed this. He said, figure out your own words. In exactly those words. Jun-Seo looked at her. With the period. She laughed. It was surprised out of her. Short and bright, and the specific laugh of someone who genuinely didn't know what else to do with the amount of love and exasperation that child produced. Jun-Seo watched it happen the way he always watched her laugh, with the full unhurried attention of someone who found the thing they were looking at genuinely extraordinary. He's been telling me things about you, she said when the laugh settled. For 3 months. Not information. More like evidence. Evidence of you. Evidence. That you work until 2 in the morning. That you didn't take Min-Jun to the doctor when he had that ear infection in September. You took him yourself and sat in the pediatric waiting room for 3 hours with your laptop, and answered emails the whole time, but you never left. She paused. That you eat the same breakfast every morning because you decided the decision fatigue wasn't worth it. That you once read an entire academic paper on Korean children's grief processing because you wanted to understand what Min-Jun might be feeling that he wasn't saying. Jun-Seo was quiet for a moment. He told you all of that. Not all at once. A little at a time. Like case notes. She looked at him. He's been building a case. A case for what? She looked at him for a moment. For you, she said simply. The plane hummed around them. Jun-Seo looked forward. His jaw was set with the particular tension she had learned to read as the external sign of internal reorganization, the way he looked when something was moving inside that he was working on naming. I've been trying to find the right words, he said. For 3 months. I've started sentences 7 times and not finished them. She turned to look at him. I know. You know. I counted, she said. 7. The flowers at the airport almost got there. He looked at her for a long moment. I kept waiting for the right time, the right setting, the right framing. A pause. Min-Jun told me once that waiting for the right time is a story people tell themselves when they're afraid. She was very still. He's 9, Jun-Seo said. Almost 10, she said. He's right. He turned to face her fully on the wide plane seat. The full turn of a man who has made a decision and is now executing it without calculation. I want you to stay in Seoul. Not for the contracts. Not professionally. I want you to stay because when you are in a room I think differently, and I have not thought differently in 4 years, and it is not a small thing. It is the thing. And because Min-Jun is better when you're there. Genuinely better, lighter, the version of himself he deserves to be. And because the pause carried everything it was carrying. Because I am too. I am better when you are there. That is the most honest sentence I have said to anyone in 4 years. I need you to know I understand what it costs. The Pacific was dark and still below the plane. Imani looked at him. She thought about a corridor at 2 a.m. and a floor she hadn't planned to sit on and a man who sat down beside her without asking. She thought about soup in a South Side kitchen, and a 9-year-old who wrote 3 pages about a river, and a grandmother who said take care of them with the weight of an entire history behind it. She said, I need you to know something. Okay, he said. I've had 1 foot out the door since October, she said. Not because I wanted to go. Because I have learned very specifically what it costs me to stay somewhere I'm not sure I'm wanted. And I needed to know, not guess, not hope, actually know before I unpacked that foot. He looked at her steadily. And now? She looked at him. Now I know. Okay, he said. Okay, she said. I'll stay. She turned to look out the window, because she needed one moment where he couldn't see her face fully. I have some conditions. Of course. Complete creative authority on all events. Agreed. No surprise visits to event spaces when you just want to be in the room. A pause. Define surprise. She turned back. Jun-Seo. That condition needs clarification, he said, and something happened at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, not quite, not one. She pointed at him. That. Whatever that is. Right there. What about it? That's new. It isn't new, he said, with the particular quiet certainty of someone who has been keeping a thing for a long time. You've just started noticing. Which was, she would think later, possibly the most revealing thing he had said in 3 months. And the truest. When they returned to Seoul, Kang Soo-yeon requested a private meeting with Imani. She arranged it directly. Not through Jun-Seo, not through his assistant. She left a note with the concierge desk addressed to Ms. Brooks asking if she would join her for tea the following morning at 10. No explanation. Imani told Priya about the note that evening. Priya said, Are you going? Of course I'm going, Imani said. Do you want me to? No, Imani said. I'm going alone. She dressed carefully the next morning. Not armor, she refused to treat it as a battle. But with the quiet attention of someone who understood that first impressions were already made, and this meeting was about something else. She wore a structured wine-red blazer and her hair in a sleek half-up style, and she walked into the hotel tea room at 9:58 because arriving early without appearing eager was its own kind of statement. Soo-yeon was already there. Of course she was. She sat at a corner table with a pot of tea already steeping, her silver bob perfect, her posture a full lesson in what a decade of decision-making looks like from the outside. She gestured to the opposite chair without ceremony. Imani sat. Soo-yeon poured the tea. She set a cup in front of Imani. She poured her own. She did not rush any of it. Then she said, I want to be honest with you. I prefer that, Imani said. Something flickered in Soo-yeon's eyes. Not quite approval, not quite surprise. The registration of someone who expected resistance and encountered directness instead. I was prepared to be against this, Soo-yeon said. I want you to know that. I assumed as much, Imani said. The reasons are not personal. There are legitimate structural reasons, the distance, the culture, the attention that will come with Jun-Seo's name, the specific pressures of this family in this country. She looked at Imani steadily. Those pressures are real. I am not going to pretend they aren't, and I am not going to be the kind of woman who pretends the world is different from what it is. I don't need you to pretend anything, Imani said. I grew up in Chicago's South Side. I have been navigating the world as it is for 33 years. I don't need it dressed up. Soo-yeon was quiet for a moment. In the last 4 years, she said, 3 women have tried to build something with my son. They were all appropriate. Good families, good educations, correct expectations. Jun-Seo was polite to all of them. He called none of them back. She lifted her tea. I knew why. He was waiting to feel something he had locked away. Something he decided he did not deserve to feel while Min-Jun needed him. Imani said nothing. She held her tea. I have been watching you since I arrived, Soo-yeon continued. I have watched the way my son is in rooms when you are in them and rooms when you are not. It is different. Not performatively different. The kind of different that happens before anyone decides to be different. She set her teacup down with the precise, deliberate care she brought to everything. I have also watched Min-Jun. She paused. The pause had weight. That child has not smiled without calculating it since November 4 years ago, she said, and her voice shifted, fractionally enough. The voice of a grandmother speaking about a child she loves. His grandfather's smile. His father's smile. I know what a real Kang smile looks like. I have been looking for it for 4 years. He smiled at you 3 times yesterday without planning to. She looked at Imani directly. He doesn't know I was counting. The tea room was quiet. Imani looked at this woman across the table. This silver-haired, sharp-eyed, controlled woman who had built and lost and rebuilt and was sitting here telling her the most honest thing she probably told anyone, and thought, she came to make peace. She came because she loves them and she can see what I am to them, and this is Kang Soo-yeon's version of a welcome. I want you to understand, Soo-yeon said, that I am not giving a blessing. It is not mine to give. Jun-Seo is 35 years old. Min-Jun is almost 10. They make their own choices. I am simply, she paused, chose words that were true. Adjusting my position. I understand, Imani said. And I want you to understand one more thing. She looked at Imani with the full, unambiguous weight of a matriarch who has earned every gray hair. If you are in this, you are in it. Those two do not get to be someone's experience or someone's interesting chapter. You are either family or you are not. I know, Imani said. That's the only version I know how to do. Soo-yeon studied her for a long moment. Then she stood. She smoothed her jacket. She looked at Imani one more time and said, with the specific weight of someone who means exactly what they say and never says more, take care of them. She walked out of the tea room. Imani sat alone with 2 teacups and a pot and the morning light coming through the windows of the hotel tea room. Seoul spreading outside, its patient skyline, its 1,000 buildings doing the business of another day. And the specific fullness of someone who has been told something true and is working out what to do with it. She sat with it for a while. Not long. She was not a person who needed a long time to work out what was true. She had known what was true for weeks. What she had needed was someone to say it without asking for anything in return. What she had needed was someone to hand it to her plain. And the person who had done that was 9 years old in Seoul, probably eating a very organized breakfast right now. She took out her phone. She typed a message to Min-Jun. The Chicago River thing. I looked it up. You were right. The response came in 43 seconds. I know. Also, I told Uncle to figure out his own words. Did he? She looked at the message. She smiled, the involuntary kind. She typed. Eventually. 3 dots. A pause. Then that took him too long. I will speak to him about efficiency. She typed. Do not talk to him. A shorter pause. Then, understood. I will allow him to believe he managed this himself. It is important for his confidence. She sat in the tea room by herself and laughed quietly at her phone in the way that only Min-Jun could make her laugh. The laugh of someone who finds a thing genuinely funny and also genuinely moving at the same time, and doesn't know what to do with the combination except feel it. She typed. You are extraordinary. You know that, right? The response took longer this time. A full minute. Then I know. But thank you for saying it. I don't hear it from people who mean it very often. She read that twice. She put her phone down on the table. She looked at the city. She thought, I am not going anywhere. I have not been going anywhere for 3 months. I just needed to stop pretending I might. She picked up her phone. She texted Priya. Book me a permanent Seoul address. Something with a real kitchen. Priya's response was a single word. Finally. I'll let him think he did it himself. This child is 9 years old. 9. If you are screaming right now, you are in the right place. Drop Min-Jun ran this whole thing in the comments right now. This is the most intense point because everything is about to come together. Share this video with someone who needs a Min-Jun in their life. Subscribe to Soul Shadows if the Soul Shadow world has your whole heart. Because we are almost at the end. And the end is the part nobody forgets. Min-Jun was at the kitchen table doing his homework when Imani arrived that evening. He looked up when she came through the apartment door. Jun-Seo had given her a key 3 weeks ago under the auspice of easier access for event coordination meetings that had never taken place here and were never scheduled to, and his face did the thing it sometimes did when something confirmed a prediction. Went very still. Then went to the neutrally satisfied expression of someone who is keeping their satisfaction controlled. Hi, he said. Hi, she said. I got your letter. I know, he said. I tracked the courier. Of course you did. She set her bag down. Crossed to the table. Sat across from him. You know you can just talk to me, right? You don't have to send correspondence. I wanted you to be able to read it more than once, he said. You can't read a conversation more than once. She looked at him. This boy in his pressed shirt with his homework and his pen and his old soul eyes. She said. The Chicago River. He looked back at his homework. I thought it was relevant. It was relevant, she said. And it was also completely on the nose. I know, he said. I decided on the nose was correct for this situation. Min-Jun. He looked up. She said. Thank you. He held her gaze for a moment. Then he nodded, one of his careful, precise, entirely meant nods, and went back to his homework. She went to the kitchen. She stood at the stove and opened cabinets and found what she needed, because she had been in this kitchen enough times by now to know where things were without asking. She found the rice and the butter and the garlic and started working, and the kitchen filled with the smell of it, and she could hear Min-Jun's pen moving steadily at the table behind her. Jun-Seo arrived at 7. She heard the front door and his footsteps in the entryway and then the particular pause. She knew that pause now, had learned it over 3 months. That meant he had registered something in the apartment was different than when he left. He came to the kitchen doorway. He stopped. She was at the stove back to him stirring the rice. Min-Jun was at the table, ostensibly doing homework, actually watching both of them in his peripheral vision with the stillness of a very small predator. You're here, Jun-Seo said. I'm cooking, she said without turning around. Don't make it a thing. I'm not making it a thing. You're using the voice. What voice? The voice where you're very quiet, Because you're feeling something and you're deciding how much of it to show. Min-Jun at the table. He does that a lot. Jun-Seo looked at his nephew. I'm just noting, Min-Jun said, returning to his homework with supreme innocence. Jun-Seo set down his briefcase. He took off his jacket. He sat at the table across from Min-Jun. He looked at his nephew's homework. He said, "This equation is wrong." Min-Jun looked at it. "Where?" "Third line. You distribute it incorrectly." Min-Jun looked at the third line. Looked at his uncle. "I did it the way my tutor showed me." "Your tutor is wrong. My tutor has a mathematics degree." "From where?" "Seoul National." "I have a business degree from Yonsei and a mathematics minor, and I'm telling you the third line is wrong." They looked at each other with the familiar specific energy of two people who are exactly alike and would never say so. "Show me," Min-Jun said. Jun-Seo took the pen. Corrected the line. Showed him. Min-Jun studied it. Nodded once. "Fine," Min-Jun said. Which Jun-Seo knew was Min-Jun, for you were right. At the stove, Imani was smiling at the wall. Dinner was rice, her rice with the butter and the garlic, and the kimchi and banchan Jun-Seo's housekeeper had left, and the specific warm noise of three people eating together that is different from the noise of two or of one. Jun-Seo ate with the focused appreciation of a man who was determined not to show how much he was enjoying it, which he had done every time she cooked, and which she had long since stopped being fooled by. "You put butter in the rice again," he said. "I did," she said. "Korean rice doesn't have butter. This rice has butter." "You're welcome." Min-Jun, eating with efficiency. "It's better with butter." Jun-Seo looked at his nephew. "You've always said it was fine." "Fine and better are different things," Min-Jun said. "I didn't want to have the conversation." Imani looked at Jun-Seo with an expression of total vindication. He looked at his bowl. Had another bite. Said nothing else about the butter. Dinner ran long the way dinners run long when nobody wants to be the person who ends it. Jun-Seo asked Min-Jun about school. Not the routine question of a distracted parent, but a specific question about the physics problem he had seen Min-Jun working on in the car 2 days ago, which Min-Jun had mentioned once in passing and apparently Jun-Seo had stored and retrieved with his characteristic precision. Min-Jun looked faintly pleased, which for him meant a barely perceptible softening around the eyes. He explained the problem. Jun-Seo listened. He asked a follow-up question that was better than the first one. Imani sat across from them both and ate her rice and listened to the two of them talk. The man and the boy who were so alike it was almost architectural, the same stillness, the same careful listening, the same way of holding silence while they formed a thought. And she felt something in her chest that she had been feeling for 3 months and had been calling professional satisfaction and was done pretending was that. "You got that from him," she said during a pause. They both looked at her. "The way you think," she said looking at Min-Jun. "The way you go quiet when you're about to say something accurate. He does that too." Min-Jun looked at his uncle. Jun-Seo looked at Min-Jun. "His father did it too," Jun-Seo said quietly. Min-Jun looked at his bowl for a moment. Then he looked up. "My father used to go quiet right before he mixed a new color," he said. "He would stand at the canvas and not move for a full minute, and then he would mix something I had never seen before." "What did he paint?" Imani asked. Min-Jun considered. "Everything," he said. "But mostly things that were familiar from unusual angles. He painted our kitchen once, but from the angle of the ceiling. So everything was upside down and the light was coming from below." He paused. "It was strange and also exactly right. You looked at it and thought, yes, that is what a kitchen feels like. Even though a kitchen never actually looks like that." The table was very quiet. The good kind of quiet. The kind that holds something carefully. "I would have liked to see that painting," Imani said. "I have a photograph," Min-Jun said. On my phone. I can show you later. I would like that, she said. Min-Jun nodded. He looked at his uncle. Jun-Seo was looking at Imani with the open, unguarded expression he was beginning, slowly 3 months in, to stop hiding. Min-Jun saw it. He did not comment on it. He filed it under entry 16. After dinner, Min-Jun cleared the table with the methodical precision he brought to everything. He stacked the dishes. He carried them to the kitchen. He came back and picked up his homework materials and his notebook. He stood at the table for a moment. I'm going to do the rest of this in my room, he said. He looked at his uncle. He looked at Imani. He nodded once at both of them with the energy of someone who has accomplished exactly what they intended, and is now leaving graciously. He walked to his room. His door closed with a soft final click. Imani and Jun-Seo sat at the table in the apartment on the 16th floor in Gangnam, and Seoul glittered outside every window, and the warmth of the dinner was still on the table and in the air and in the low amber light of the apartment. He showed me a photograph before he went to his room, Imani said. Jun-Seo looked at her. The painting. His father's kitchen painting. She looked at the table. The one from the angle of the ceiling. Everything upside down with the light coming from below. Jun-Seo was quiet for a moment. He doesn't show that to most people. I know. She looked at him. I could tell. He keeps it on his phone, Jun-Seo said. He's had it there since he was 5. He transferred it from his mother's phone to his first phone and then to the next one. He makes sure it doesn't get lost in backups. A pause. He's never explained why he showed me that specifically, and I've never asked. Because it was his father at his best, Imani said. Doing the thing he was made to do. Looking at something ordinary and finding the extraordinary angle. She looked at Jun-Seo carefully. He showed it to me because he wanted me to understand where he comes from. Not just the loss. The before. Jun-Seo looked at her for a long moment. You understand him, he said. It was not a question or a surprise. It was the sound of someone confirming something they had suspected for a long time, and were only now allowing themselves to say aloud. I'm paying attention, she said simply. Same as he pays attention. He gets that from his father too, Jun-Seo said. Yoon-ho noticed everything. He could walk into a room and tell you what had changed since the last time he was in it. Small things. The angle of a lamp. A book moved to a different shelf. He was quiet for a moment. I used to think it was a painter thing. Now I think it was just Yoon-ho. It's Min-Jun's thing too, she said. It is, he agreed. She looked at her hands on the table. At Jun-Seo's hands across from hers. The same hands that had been placed over hers on the plane. That simple certain contact, no ceremony. He wrote in the letter, she said, that you read reports on children's grief processing. After he first came to live with you. Jun-Seo was still. He knows about that. He was 5. He read better than most 7-year-olds. She looked at him. He told me it was the thing that made him sure you were going to be okay. Not the money or the company or the apartment. That you went and looked something up because you didn't want to get it wrong. Jun-Seo was quiet for a long time. The city moved outside the windows, patient and lit, Seoul doing what Seoul did. I was terrified, he said finally. Imani and Jun-Seo sat at the table in the apartment on the 16th floor in Gangnam, and the city glittered outside every window, and the table still had the warmth of the dinner on it. He planned that exit, Imani said. He plans everything, Jun-Seo said. He has a notebook. He has 3 notebooks, Jun-Seo said. I've counted. I think there are more. She looked at the closed door. Then at Jun-Seo. Your mother came to see me today, she said. He was still. I know. She told me. She told you. She came to my office afterward and said, I spoke to your woman. I told her she was family or she wasn't. He looked at her. Then she said, she's family. And she left. Imani was quiet for a moment. She said that. Those exact words. She looked at the table. At the warmth the dinner had left. At the city outside. She thought about a letter that talked about rivers running backward and a grandmother adjusting her position and a mother on a hospital bed, who had said take care of them, and a man sitting across from her on a private plane saying I am better when you're there. Jun-Seo, she said. He looked at her. Okay, she said. I'm in. He looked at her steadily. You already said okay on the plane. I'm saying it again. On the ground. In your apartment. With the butter rice. She met his gaze and held it. I'm in. He looked at her for a moment with the full face expression she had learned was his version of saying everything at once. Then he reached across the table and set his hand over hers, not dramatically, not as a gesture, just placed it there with the certain unhurried intention of someone who has decided something and is done deliberating. And the contact was so simple and so right that she didn't breathe for a second. Good, he said. Later that evening in his room, Kang Min-Jun sat at his desk. The apartment had settled into the sound of two adults in a living room, which was a different sound than two adults in a living room who were not entirely certain of each other. He had been listening to that difference for 3 months. Tonight the uncertainty was gone. It was simply two people in a room being comfortable, and the sound of it was better than he had even projected. He opened the observation notebook, the original one with the hard cover, the unlined pages. He turned to the progress section. 14 entries. He uncapped his pen and wrote entry 15. She is staying. He used his own words. Took him long enough. 7 attempts over 3 months and he arrived. I am choosing not to log the exact timeline because it is embarrassing for him. I will remember it privately. He added a second line. The butter rice has been correct from the beginning. He will formally acknowledge this within 3 weeks. I will not say I told you so. I will think it with significant satisfaction. He read both lines back. Left them as written. He turned to a blank page at the very back of the notebook, the section he kept for things not yet happened but already decided. He wrote in careful capital letters. Next objective. Uncle smiles. Real one. In public. Unprompted. Not the ghost, the full thing. Timeline before Yuri. He underlined it twice. He added below it. Approach still to be determined. Different conditions required. I will identify them. He capped the pen. He closed the notebook. He sat for a moment at the desk. Then he reached into the bottom drawer and took out the green notebook. The other one, the one he had never shown anyone, the one with only 2 previous entries. He opened it to the next blank page and wrote, the apartment has 3 people in it tonight. Not visitors. Not guests. 3 people who are choosing to be here. I did not know for certain this was possible. I thought it might be. I have been paying attention for a long time to things that look broken and are actually only incomplete. This was incomplete. Now it is something else. He considered. Then he added one more sentence. I think my father would have liked her. She fixes things without being asked to. He closed the green notebook. He put it back in the bottom drawer. He sat with that for a moment, the sentence, the truth of it, the weight and the lightness of it both at once. Then he turned off the desk lamp. He went to the window and stood looking at Seoul the way he always did at night. All those lights, all that motion, all those separate lives running simultaneously in the dark. His city. His uncle's city. Her city now, or becoming it, one dinner at a time. He was 9 years old and had lost everything he loved most 4 years ago on a Tuesday in November, and he had spent those 4 years paying very close, very careful attention to the question of how a person rebuilds from a loss that size. And the answer, the real one, the one that took 4 years to locate, was that you rebuilt it one true thing at a time. One honest sentence spoken at the right time. One crooked flower corrected before anyone asked. One letter sent by courier because some things needed to be in writing. One chair pulled out across a cafe table with purpose. One seat set at a dinner table for 3. One river made to run in the right direction. He left the window. He crossed the room in the dark and lay down and pulled the blanket to his chin and looked at the ceiling. From the living room came the sound of her laugh, the surprised short real one she kept for things that genuinely caught her, and then his uncle's voice, quiet and low, and then her laugh again, different the second time, easier, the laugh that comes when the first one has broken something open and what is underneath is warm. Min-Jun had counted 7 real laughs across 3 months. Tonight he did not count. He simply heard it and thought, yes, that sound. That is the sound of something repaired. He did not name what he was feeling. He did not need to. He was Kang Min-Jun. He had known what this was going to be from the moment she stood in the lobby with her clipboard and said what she said, and he said interesting and walked away to write it in his notebook. He had known. He had always known. He had simply been patient enough to let it take the shape it needed to take. He closed his eyes. Outside Seoul kept going. All those lights. All that motion. All those lives doing what lives do when they are left to themselves. Finding their direction, running the right way, building the things that last. He slept. Family. He didn't need to name it. He already knew. And so do you. If part 2 of this story gave you everything you came back for, if Min-Jun's letter broke you, if Soo-yeon's take care of them hit different, if Jun-Seo putting his hand over hers at that table made you exhale, then this channel was made exactly for you. Subscribe to Soul Shadows right now if you are not already family. Hit the like button. Share this video with someone who needs to feel something real today. And drop your answer in the comments. He finally used his own words, or she stayed for the butter rice. Let's see who's been paying attention. And Min-Jun? We see you. We always see you. See you in part 3.